I'd like to call this meeting of the Bellingham City Council to order. One announcement before we get going. On Wednesday, December 17th at 7 o'clock in the council chambers, there will be a City Council special meeting to select and appoint the Ward 3 interim City Council member. If people could rise and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Terry Borneman.
Here.
Gene Knutson.
Here.
Michael Lillquist.
Here.
Roxanne Murphy.
Here.
Pinky Vargas.
Here.
Jack Weiss.
Here.
And Kathy Lehman is excused. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now have our 15-minute public comment period. Got a sign-up sheet here. If people want to come forward as I call your name, you have 3 minutes to address the council on most any topic, but not on, we have a public hearing tonight, and that's on the dissolution of the Bellingham Public Development Authority. So you, during this comment period, can't speak on that topic. You can speak during the hearing on it. And also, I just need to throw it out in case, since we're having the appointment of a council person at the special meeting, we also have a rule about not speaking in terms of any political candidate, and that would include people that we're going to appoint. And so it's kind of snuck by last week on one, and I didn't before I even thought about it, but I want to make sure I address that tonight. So we have 3 people signed up right now. If you want to come forward, Ken Holmes, Rick Wilson, and Ted Eugenia. Okay, thank you. Ken.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the fact that today you earlier talked about affordable housing. And yet here we are for months and months and months. You are trying to raise the price of rental properties within the city of Bellingham. And it just seems a little odd to me that you do both. Now, one thing that you have talked about is costs. Registration fee, inspection fee, fines. Well, did you notice the apartment association rep when he spoke? What did he, if you boil it down to what he said, he basically in the end said, how much? Because that's what he's going to put on tenants. Costs. Okay, registration, inspection, fines, you're going to put a dollar amount on those. But you're avoiding talking about the landlord. He has to take the time to sign up. He's got to take the time to come down and turn in his sign up and registration. You know, if there's an inspection, he's got to arrange his time so that he can be there for the inspection to protect his rights as the landlord. He also has to get a hold of the tenant and make arrangements for the tenant to come. And the tenant has some rights and should be represented, so he's got to make arrangements so that everybody can be there and it's convenient and it goes well. That takes time and effort, and it's worth money. Okay? Mr. Wise suggested landlords should feel obligated to cover the costs out of pocket even. Really? Does Mr. Weiss donate his time, effort, money, or does he take paid benefits for the good of the city? And how about the rest of you? Are you taking money, benefits? The idea of it's a negligible cost. The arrogance that you would think it's a negligible cost. Now, it might be to you in your living situation, but there are people out here in the community that are renting. It is not negligible. It's real dollars. It could mean food. It could mean shoes for a child. It could mean sports for a teenager. You got older people. You got people of all stripes out there. And it takes money out of their pockets. And you act as if no big deal. You got some thinking to do in my mind.
Rick Wilson and Ted Eugenia. Right after him. Yep.
That's perfect. That's just perfect. Thank you. Hello, my name is Rick Wilson. My wife and I, years ago, started a petition and were advised by the city to conglomerate it. And this was the whole Dewey Valley Mount Baker annexation in 2008 is when it stopped. We were advised to alter the barrier a little bit and change some of the boundaries of it. There's a good portion of it in the Dewey Valley. There is some industrial area over here, and there's some areas that's already fully developed. This is all right along the Mount Baker Highway with Squalicum High School and Northern Heights Elementary, right in close proximity. This is just a blow up of this map. This is the city limit boundaries. It's also the UGA boundaries on this gray area. So we went and altered the boundaries some and left out a good part of the Dewey Valley, includes the 2 DNR properties and Trickle Creek. And it was tough. We own a piece of property.
Could you
out
get
here.
closer to the mic, please?
Pardon? Oh, get closer to the mic. We own a good, we own our piece out here, and there's a gentleman, Mr. Richardson, that's a little further out. And when we set the boundaries, we just said, well, it's the UGA. This is where the city wants to grow. This is where, where the land has been thought about and where it made the most sense. So we just included every piece of property that had a Mount Baker address. There are, the X's indicate the people that did not wish to sign the petition. There's 2 out here, there's 2 right close to the highway, and then there's 4 on the south side of the highway by the high school who chose not to sign the petition. There is 2 petitions going forward. One is just slightly smaller. It includes everyone but this last bit. I just asked the council to, it's just my wife and I. We're not developers. We don't have a lot of resources or connections. We just kind of went out and said, hey, this is what it takes. You start getting petitions, you pay the fees, you talk to your neighbors, and we know every person out here and have talked to them personally, and the ones that want in adamantly, and there's some that don't care, and there's some that definitely do not want in. It's some of you were here. It'll get heated, whichever one is chosen. And I always hear we don't want houses, we don't want traffic, and no one has a thing against doors or chimneys. It's the people in those houses they don't want near them, and it's kind of a buffer to say you don't want houses, but what they're saying is they don't want the people in there that close to them. And I just ask you consider our petition. Thank you.
Okay. The last person on the sign-up sheet is Ted Eugenia.
Thank you, Your Worship. This lady's name is Stephanie Vin. My name is Ted Eugenia. and I'm representing newly formed incorporated company in Washington State named Quake Ready LLC. Quake Ready LLC is the company that is handling Quake Trip. Quake Trip is the most sophisticated ever introduced to the market, a unit that shuts off the power.
Excuse me, sir. One of the things with the, and I'm going to ask the city attorney on this, but on our public comment period, one of the things mentioned is promotion of individual companies isn't allowed for the use of this time on television time. So, so I need to check with the attorney because I don't think.
I would just, Peter Rafato, City Attorney's Office, I would just confirm that that is one of the rules for public comment as adopted by the City Council.
Yes, yes, sir. So we can't use the television time to promote an
Well,
individual
then
company.
I'm going to refrain from the subject in particular, and I'm going to continue with some other observations.
Okay.
Because I used to be in your chair at one time as
Yeah.
well, and
Yeah,
I came.
I just want to make it clear because
Yeah,
we try to be equal on everyone on
First
this.
of all, let's wish everybody Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yes,
I'm coming here with good intentions.
yes.
I want you to know that. And I have no choice but to say it, that for the first time ever in this city, in this state, we already obtained the city license in here. In the state, for the first time ever, we will have the most sophisticated unit that will prevent the fire after the earthquake. And I will not say no more about that, except that this lady is our agent for the state. We will be employing in the state of Washington no less than 50, 60 people, plus Oregon, Washington. I think my piece is done. Thank you for allowing me to come in here, and God bless you all.
God bless you all. And we love employers coming into our city.
Thank you. And this is a very
Thank you.
genuine thing.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to address the council? Gene?
Yes. I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to somebody that passed away 2 weeks ago. Jim Talbot was the owner of Bellingham Cold Storage in Barclay Village. He passed away 2 weeks ago. It all started in 1941 with his dad, Archie, who started the Bellingham Shipyards, where they built ships during the war. Bellingham Cold Storage started in 1946. Barclay started in the mid-90s. And I've had the pleasure working for him for 39 years. He has employed, along with his father and now his son Stowe, thousands of people over the last 68 years. And when you think of Bellingham, you think of the Hagen family, the Walton family, the Westford family. There's so many families that came from other areas. He came from Seattle, Washington, and his dad came from Seattle, Washington, and built the business here in Bellingham and to what it is today. And he was also a big player in getting Benaroya Hall built in Seattle. He loved the arts. That's transcended with his son Stowe, who has so gracefully donated the space for our library over at Barclay. But he doesn't want any memorials. He didn't want any memorials. I just want to praise him for a local entrepreneur who made Bellingham what it is today, along with a lot of other families. And all I can say after all the years I've known him is rest in peace, Jim.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Gene. He was... Okay. Next up, we have a presentation for Exploration Academies for the 20 years of an education that matters. And I believe, what? Okay. Yes, Patrick.
While she's working on that, let me just
Good, yeah.
let me just say it's an honor to be here with you all, and I really appreciate the council making time for this, and I very much appreciate the mayor making time for this. Citizens of Bellingham, it's a real privilege to be here with you all.
Yeah.
And this is we have all the outside stuff still.
Daniel, you want to introduce yourself for the TV audience? Yeah, okay.
Full screen. There we go. Excellent. Thank you again for the privilege of being here. My name is Daniel Kirkpatrick, and I tend to talk quickly. I'll try and slow it down a little bit. I am the director and one of the co-founders of Explorations Academy, which is an independent high school located here in Bellingham, fully accredited, and we are celebrating our 20th year, this school year, of service to the youth and families of Bellingham and surrounds. So it's a great opportunity and honor for me to be here. So I have a brief presentation to share with you all. Telling you a little bit about our school, and I'm probably going to focus more on the why of our school, at least at the outset, than the what, because not all of you are probably familiar with our school and our mission. So let me start by suggesting that 20 years ago when we started our school, we the founders were concerned with two particular things that we felt like were critical needs. And the first one had to do with what was going on in the world around us. Doesn't show up very well. But we were looking and saying, there's stuff going on in this world that our educational system is not really equipped to fully address. And they include many things you're familiar with, including climate change. We're also facing the end of the petroleum era, and we don't really know what that's going to look like. Right now we're awash in oil, but it's a temporary aberration, I assure you. Climate change, end of petroleum. We're also looking at habitat destruction, which continues pretty much unabated throughout the world. Species extinction, militarism, economic imbalance. These are things that, for the most part, our educational system isn't really addressing, and we don't necessarily have the tools or know-how to address them right now. And the other key thing that we were looking at is what's going on for teenagers themselves. And we looked at a lot of our very capable young people are not really being engaged in their education to the extent that they need to be, and teenagers mostly do not feel respected in our society. I can say this as somebody that's worked with teenagers for almost 40 years, since I was one. So we looked at teenagers as being an opportunity, an untapped resource, and a group of people that really have immense potential for influencing our world in positive ways, but they need to be nurtured in order to do so. So that was the genesis 20 years ago. And really what Einstein reminds us is that to make change, we need to start by changing how we think. So let me start with looking at what that thinking change might need to look like. We're 15 years into the new century, and we're still mostly using and relying upon an educational model 150 years old. So there is a growing consensus now, 15 years into the new century, about what an education designed for this century might actually look like. So I want to touch on a few quick points that guided the formation of our school, and I think are relevant as we look at what education needs to be doing as we move into further into this century. So there are 4 points that have kind of emerged, and as this points out, there's a kind of a growing consensus. More and more people are acknowledging that these are critical and central things. First of all is, how do we use information? I like to take this little gizmo out of my pocket and wave around and say, this thing has 32,000 times the computing capacity of the computer I used to write my master's thesis on. Information is everywhere. Everywhere. And so are we going to continue using an educational model that relies upon its primary purpose being the delivery of information? I think that's short-sighted. And so how do we still need to deliver information. Kids need to know stuff, but they need to know what to do with the stuff they know. So we're looking at critical thinking skills. We're looking at higher order skills like application and analysis of information, not just the absorbing and rephrasing of information. The second one of these things is creative problem solving. As I pointed out earlier, there are questions we're facing we don't have the answers to. So are we going to just teach kids to answer the right questions on the test? That's inadequate. We really need to be teaching young people to think outside the box and to start embracing potential answers to questions that we don't really fully grasp yet. The third one of these is interpersonal skills and putting an emphasis on leadership, on cross-cultural communication, on conflict resolution. These are areas that most traditional education barely touches on, but are proving to be more and more central to the modern world. And the fourth one of these has to do with the modern world itself. We're increasingly interconnected. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, is aware of that. We're having to deal with more and more really complicated global issues, and our education system is slow to catch up to those needs. So we set out to do our best to create an education that speaks to some of these concerns. So where it starts with is this notion of inspiring young people, inspiring youth to become leaders. That's really what guided the formation and guides the growth and development of our school, still 20 years in. So there are three, what we call pillars, three key parts of what makes Explorations Academy a viable education for this current century. Starts out with having education be personally meaningful for each kid. Not just telling them, sit down, shut up, this will be important when you get to college, but really saying, hey, what's going on in your life right now, and what things do you need to know to be effective? So we start out with this issue, with this concern around making it personally meaningful. And now we're coming back to some of the things I spoke to earlier, higher level thinking skills. Kids don't want to have an education that's dumbed down. They want to be challenged to the edge. They want to be called upon to think critically and deal with complex issues. And so then we have this creative problem-solving piece. What are some of the things that we don't have answers to? Instead of saying to the kids, oh, you'll get to that later in grad school or whatever, we want to bring the kids right now to dealing with some of these questions. And it's very engaging for them to feel like they're being called upon to help us answer questions that we need answers to. So the result of this personal foundation to education is that there's this inspiration to really engage with education and make education meaningful on a personal level. The second thing we work on is a respectful community of teachers and students. Now, there's no educator anywhere that would advocate for a disrespectful learning community. So we're not really in the fringes on this one. However, we're applying tools to make the rubber meet the road on this goal in a way that most other schools are not really able to. So being a small school helps, having small class sizes helps, and we have a number of other tools that we use to try and bring the interpersonal relationships to a really high level of integrity and compassion and accountability. So we start with the accountability piece, holding kids to high standards. And what makes me feel most successful is when I hear a kid saying to another kid, hey, we don't treat people like that at Explorations. So when they're starting to acculturate to a different set of norms for how people treat each other, we know we're succeeding. Another piece of this is really consciously and intentionally teaching skills that help them become effective in interpersonal settings. So the result of this focus on positive community is empowerment. The kids develop skills that are very effective and useful in any setting, college, work, military, wherever they end up. These skills are universally applicable. Maybe they'll end up on the city council someday. And then the third piece that we really focus on, don't shake your head. The third piece that we really have adopted as a principle of our school is global understanding. And again, our world is increasingly complex and increasingly interconnected. So how do you create an education that embraces that? You start by building a curriculum that really truly embraces some of that complexity. And that means not pulling textbooks off the shelf that were generated 10 or 20 years ago, but really looking around the world at what's happening right now. Our teachers actually author the curriculum that they deliver to our students on an ongoing basis. Example, we had a class last year called Arab Spring. Now, the Arab Spring is a phenomenon of revolutions that spread across North Africa and the Middle East. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. It's going to show up in textbooks eventually. We taught it right as it was happening, with an emphasis on the role youth are playing and technology is playing in those right now happening revolutions across the Arab world. So this kind of curriculum engages kids. They say, wow, this is real stuff. It's going on right now. And they start wanting to read the papers because they want to know what's the next development in Syria or in Egypt or in Libya. So the curriculum is one piece of that. And another piece of that is getting the kids out of the classroom and traveling to other parts of the world. So we have had kids in places as diverse as Peru, Ireland, India, Kenya, Cuba, Thailand, all over the place, and these are 1 month-long trips, and they're not package deals where they sit in a little air-conditioned tour bus. They're actually out there in the chicken buses, traveling through the countryside, learning and building relationships with people in other parts of the world, which really helps them gain, amongst other things, a deep sense of appreciation for themselves as Americans and all the amazing privileges we have that they tend to take for granted. But then also, they start embracing some of the needs and realities of people in other parts of the world. So the results of this focus on global education is the kids are actually gaining tools to be effective, again, in a wide variety of settings, but as global citizens. So I realize I'm about out of time. There's a couple of things I want to just close with. One is, I've been sort of stressing this point, but our school is developed primarily as a way to help young people become effective global citizens. Do we provide an excellent high school education? Yes. Is that our primary reason for being? No. There's excellent high school education available in this town, but most of what it doesn't do is really embrace these considerations that bring kids into the 21st century and make them effective global citizens. The second piece, I have not spoken to it all yet, but I want to take a moment on this. We have a track record. 20 years this school has been in existence. We have never turned a kid away for financial reasons. And what that means is a very, very active philanthropic endeavor where we're raising money continuously from individuals, from businesses around town, from foundations. We go all over the place in search of resources. Our school costs $15 grand. $15,000. We are a nonprofit, but it costs $15,000 for us to educate a kid. And roughly half of our kids get financial aid. Why? Because they're appropriate for the school. They took a step forward and were willing to take a risk and apply and become exploration students. We are willing to go the extra mile to raise the money to make it possible for those kids. So we really occupy a unique place amongst private schools in our embrace of making the school affordable to all. It is our hope to continue this track record through continued philanthropy and the generosity of our community. So that said, I want to thank the council and the mayor for your generosity in making the time available for me to speak to you. And by extension, I also want to thank all the citizens of Bellingham that you represent for the support that you provide for our school. Thank you very much.
Yes, he does talk fast. I understood. Well, actually, I have history with Dan, too. I think that I had my first visit to Exploration High School when I was a state legislator years ago. So I've watched the program grow and become very successful, to your credit, and the staff. So I have a mayoral proclamation.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know, it's really fun. Not one of those. Whereas a diverse range of positive educational opportunities helps make for a healthy community, and whereas strong schools are an important part of what makes Bellingham a uniquely vibrant city, and whereas Exploration Academy has for 20 years provided capable young people in Bellingham with a college prep education of diverse curriculum, including topics like Chinese, gardening, carpentry, and martial arts, as well as traditional academic subjects, and whereas extremely creative and dedicated teachers have made student learning at Exploration Academy a transformational experience, and whereas field experiences off campus, averaging 1 day a week, enrich the learning of Exploration students, and whereas a commitment to global education, Exploration students travel and study in places like India, Kenya, Peru, Thailand, Cuba, and Indonesia, and whereas frequent service projects would serve many sectors of our community are a key part of learning at Exploration Academy, and whereas substantial financial aid, over $1 million to date, has allowed kids of all incomes to attend Explorations, and whereas extensive support from individuals and businesses across the city has made Exploration successful, and whereas the graduates of Explorations go out into the world with the tools to be global citizens and implement positive change, now therefore do I, Mayor Kelly Linville, proclaim Monday, December 8th, 2014 as Exploration Academy Day. And thank you for all your hard work. Thank you so very much. You're welcome.
Terry, can I ask a question?
Yes.
How many students do you have?
34 at the moment.
34. Does that go up and down every year, or?
It fluctuates. It's largely on a very slow growth curve.
Okay.
Yeah, small numbers, big impact.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to say thank you for hanging in there and providing a true quality alternative for a lot of kids who, yes, we have a great education system in Bellingham, but not everyone fits that model. And you provided a true quality alternative for a lot of kids who are very bright but don't fit that model, and you've allowed them to bloom. And so thank you for that hard work and hanging in there, because I know it's been a tough 20 years at times. So
It's been challenging at times,
Yes.
but it's also my daily pleasure. Thank you.
yes, thank you. Okay, now we will move into, we have a public hearing. It's a public hearing to consider approval and passage of a resolution finding that dissolution of the Bellingham Public Development Authority is warranted. On September 22nd, 2014, pursuant to the requirements of the Second City of Bellingham, Bellingham Public Development Authority, the BPDA Memorandum of Understanding of June 9th, 2014, the BPDA gave a presentation to the City Council on the status of the Army Street project. The BPDA determined that the Army Street project, as proposed under the Army Street Property Owners Memorandum of Agreement dated January 15, 2014, was not feasible at this time. On October 13, 2014, when the City Council held a 2015 budget work session, the mayor proposed that the BPDA not be funded in 2015. The City Council took no action to fund the BPDA in the 2015 budget. On October 15, 2014, the BPDA board took action to terminate without cause its contract with Executive Director James Long as of October 31, 2014. Under the enabling ordinance of the BPDA, the council may consider a resolution finding that dissolution is warranted. So, Peter, are you?
Yeah, Peter Raffato, Legal Department, just to add a little bit to that. So the process for dissolution, if that is the desire of the council, is outlined in the enabling ordinance. If the council passes the resolution, that will trigger some specific final steps that would be taken in ultimately implementing the dissolution. That would include the PDA filing a dissolution statement. There's a statement that's been prepared, not yet signed, but it gives the basic outline of debts, obligations, and assets, and any final details that would be necessary to dissolve the PDA. The most substantive aspect would be a return of the Army Street property back to the city, and ultimately it would lead to cancellation of the charter. I would just note that the ordinance that was put in on the consent agenda, I know that was taken off, that was on the assumption that would only be something to be considered or primarily considered if the dissolution was to be passed by the council. And I can answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We have, well, before we start, anything from the questions from the council before we open it up for public comment? Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the things that we had talked about at one point in time was kind of putting the PDA to rest and not necessarily dissolving it, but keeping the entity there. And we explored that with legal staff. Part of the problem with that was if there is a PDA that's the charter allows it to stay in existence, not the charter but the ordinances, then we have a certain amount of activity we need to do to meet the criteria for keeping the PDA going. And that's why we recommended the dissolution rather than the suspension, because there was more involved than just letting it sit on the books. So I just wanted to explain that briefly to the council, that we did consider suspension.
Jack and then Michael.
Mayor, what's the scope of the activity that needs to happen in that type of situation?
I'll let Peter answer that question.
So some of the things to recognize, the PDA is an entity that is by statute has certain powers. It's not, for example, an advisory board. It has its own powers. And so the enabling ordinance had a fairly lengthy list of projects and scope that it would have to go through. There's an agreement between the PDA and the city which contemplates certain activity. All these things would have to be changed. You have to figure out what exactly is the mission of a PDA. You'd have to have a board. There would have to be some, and I haven't looked at exactly how frequent the meetings would have to be, but you'd have to have a board, an appointed board. There would be some reporting for auditing purposes. But again, you'd basically be going back and reworking a lot of the enabling ordinance and the charter. I think the charter envisions a certain number of meetings, I believe. So you'd basically be going back, looking at the charter, the enabling ordinance, and the operating agreements to determine exactly what is the function of the PDA at this point. And the statute envisions an active entity that has a mission.
Okay. Michael?
Thanks, Terry. I had the same question, and I don't quite feel it's been answered. You said the mission may need to be re-looked at, but that's not part of making go dormant. It sounds like all we have to do is have a board and a minimum number of meetings, which maybe could be changed if the charter was changed. I don't know, that doesn't sound like too much of a hassle. A bit of a hassle, but not a great hassle.
The other thing to consider is if there was something specific for the PDA to do, what would you do? And there's nothing stopping you from passing another ordinance that would reconstitute the PDA, and at that point you'd know exactly what the PDA is going to do and what level of activity would be required to meet that function.
I think now we're engaging in an argument about PDAs. I really just want information on what it would take to pursue an alternative pathway of making it go dormant. And right now I'm just hearing appoint a board and have a perfunctory meeting.
Okay. Pinky?
Peter, I'm wondering if I can ask a clarifying question, because the council, we've already voted to not fund the PDA, right? So we've already passed that. So if I feel like we're kind of going backwards here. I'm a little confused, I guess. If we've already said not to fund it, then if we were to keep anything in existence, it would need funding. It seems like these two things aren't, forgive my ignorance here, but I don't quite understand.
I guess, to answer that question and to kind of continue on with Councilmember Lilliquist's question, I mean, it is true that the council did not take action in response to the fact that the mayor did not put funding in the budget. So the council took no action to put that funding back in. That's sort of the decision that was outlined in the agenda bill and what led to this hearing and the consideration of the resolution. I guess the question is if there's some vision for the PDA, then we could determine exactly what would be required under the statute to meet that to meet that statutory requirement and what level of activity that would be.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I will open the public hearing up for public testimony. At this point, we have two people signed up to address the council. The first is Dan Pike, followed by Scott Barg.
Good evening, council members, mayor, and everyone in Bellingham. First, I want to thank you guys for your service. All of you, I probably understand better than most what it's like. I wanted to come, first of all, to just give thanks to the people that served on this board. They did a lot of really good work for a long time, sometimes caught in the crossfire between different interests, and over the last several years without getting a full complement of replacements put on the board so they could do their work most effectively. So in particular, I want to thank, well, I'm going to first thank folks that served in the past that aren't on anymore, which would include Bruce McCormick, Rudd Brown, Anne Marie Fayola, Dan Guyette, and Brian Steele. And they all served at various times of the past 6+ years. And then I really want to thank Scott Barg, former Mayor Ken Hertz, Heather Wolf, and Chris Webb, who served the entire length of that body. And regardless of whether or not people thought it was a good idea to have the PDA to begin with, those folks did some phenomenally good work. The information they developed will be very useful for whoever ends up developing the waterfront, whether it's done publicly, privately, or in some sort of partnership. And so I want to thank them for that service, because I think too often people serve this community thanklessly in thankless jobs. I would also encourage you to think carefully about not shutting the PDA down altogether. The PDA is a very useful tool, and it took a fair amount of work and effort and expense to get it put together. Mothballing something is a lot simpler most of the time than killing it and then bringing it back when you need it. The PDA is a tool that's useful in a variety of scenarios for a variety of councils or mayors for purposes of providing the arm's length relationship and that is necessary sometimes for effective development, but at the same time retaining the ultimate control that ensures that the public interest is paid attention to. And so I would say, it certainly seems to me it makes sense at this time. I understand why it's being mothballed. You know, I'm not going to go into the opportunities I think could have been, because where we are now, I think it does make sense to not spend more money at this point in time. But the one thing I do know is that we never fully know what's going to come down the line. Having this tool available means that as the waterfront starts redeveloping, or as other developments happen that the city has an interest in, both a fiduciary interest as well as a regulatory interest, we have a tool in our toolbox that can be used to make that happen, to help make this a more vibrant community. So with that, I just want to say thank you for all of your work again. Thanks again to all the people that served on this board. I think it's an example of the great community we have. In fact, Jerry Johnson, who put together the PDAs for the Tacoma, the Foss Waterway, for the Seattle Art Museum, he helped us put this together, and he said he was impressed that we had comparable talent in the city of Bellingham to the environs of Seattle or Tacoma. And I think that's absolutely true. And we had a wonderful group of people serving on there with immense talent. And so again, just in passing, I'll say thanks to them once more. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Barg?
Good evening. My name's Scott Barg. I live at 2315 Eldridge Avenue in Bellingham. I was appointed a board member of the PDA at its creation in 2008, and I've had the honor of serving as chairperson since 2010. Before we go into the particulars of dissolution, I really want to thank everyone, we'll echo here what Dan just said, who supported the Public Development Authority during its 6+ years. In particular, I'd like to thank all of our board members who devoted their time and energy with no compensation beyond an occasional sandwich. Our executive director, Jim Long, worked tirelessly to find creative ways to develop challenging properties. And our executive assistant, Allison Henshaw, deserves many thanks for keeping everything working. She really does. I also want to thank Dan Pike for having the inspiration and doing the heavy lifting to create the PDA, and Mayor Linville for reappointing me and other remaining board members of the board. I also want to give special thanks to former and current city council members who have supported our efforts, sometimes at real political cost, and even those who did not, who I'm sure thoughtfully voted their conscience. I also want to thank the property owners who are part of the Army Street project for their patience and commitment to the project. I am proud of the work that we did. I am pleased that we were able to keep our focus on the triple bottom line and raise the bar a bit on what constitutes good development in Bellingham. And while much of the value that we produce for the city may not be seen for a while, I still think the PDA was a good idea, and I feel confident that we left things better than they would have been without the PDA. I need to be honest and say I had a lot of thoughts about how we ended up here tonight, as I'm sure does everyone else in this room. But we're not here to do a postmortem. We're here to decide whether or not to dissolve the PDA. So instead of revisiting the past, I'm going to try to stay focused as much as possible on moving forward and outline a few items I think would help any future PDA, should we decide to reconstitute one, to succeed. Just a little aside, PDAs are really respected tools of government for development. They're widely used in Washington State and around the country because they allow the cities to accomplish specific purposes without assuming them into the regular functions of government. PDAs can engage in certain kinds of partnerships and business relationships that cities cannot. A PDA can also focus all of its attention on a specific project, and since it's a legally separate entity, it can provide a financial buffer for its parent government. Some PDAs fail, but most of them function well and produce positive financial or other public returns. The City of Seattle has 8 separate PDAs to accomplish a number of different public benefits. So, just in the chance that we think a PDA might be needed sometime in Bellingham's future, what do we need to do to ensure its success? First of all, PDA needs a clear purpose or mission. What do you want this entity to accomplish? Why should it exist? How will it benefit the city? Once you have identified a real need, the entity needs to be legally authorized by the council to make decisions and do the work that it needs to do to succeed. Along with that, along with that authority comes a parallel level of responsibility to affect that success. Audits and reporting relationships can be put into place to ensure that the organization is staying on mission and providing value to the city. Fully authorizing and funding the PDA provides protection for both sides. It protects the integrity of the institution and also protects the relationships that the PDA builds with other entities over time. Now, one goal of most PDAs, not all of them, is to return value to the city in excess of its investment costs. However, in order to succeed, I believe that a sufficient initial investment of working capital and operating expenses must be provided that will allow the PDA to function for a period of time that is appropriate to its mission. In the formative years of the PDA, it works best if this funding can be independent of the annual budgeting process. Good development is complex and hard to do and often takes a long time. This temporary isolation from the annual budgeting process is not to protect the PDA from responsibility, but to encourage success by protecting its ability to build long-term relationships with developers and engage in long-term projects that do not easily fit within annual budget cycles. And you have to think about a board. As Dan mentioned, our 7-member board worked really well. We were very fortunate to have a functional and committed group. All the 4 remaining board members are among the original 7 from 2008. And they represented a variety of expertise and interests. Of course, there will be vacancies over time, and these must be filled with consideration for the same type of diversity that drove the original board composition. And I can't emphasize this enough. Every effort must be made to ensure that timely reappointments are made for board members who leave. The work of the organization can really suffer if vacancies are allowed to go unfulfilled for extended periods. The city created an excellent process for choosing an executive director. We instituted a nationwide search with a recruiting firm, brought in several candidates for day-long meetings and interaction with government officials and members of the public, followed by a more traditional interview process. I would recommend that future PDAs follow something very similar. Regardless of whether the PDA is formed to focus on a specific project like a convention center or museum, or as was the case with the current Public Development Authority, to develop several city-owned properties over time, these city-owned properties must be conveyed to the PDA without significant restrictions on their use. If the intent is to develop multiple properties over time, a plan also needs to be in place to ensure the proper phasing and timely conveyance of these properties. Most of the other elements that were addressed in the operating agreements in the city and PDA, the need for a strategic plan, designated liaison between the city and PDA, reporting methods and timing, many of these may be reusable, but if given a new PDA, they may need to be revisited depending on its needs. So back to the question we're here to consider. Should the city dissolve the BPDA? Well, I think it mostly comes down to a matter of efficiency, practicality, and adaptability. Given the substantial cost and effort that went into drafting the initial ordinance and charter for the PDA, it might make sense to find out if the PDA can be mothballed and restarted at a later date. Since the PDA can be dissolved at any time, if there's even a small chance that we could save the trouble of recreating one, I'd recommend keeping it around for a while. In closing, I'd like to say I really initially became interested in PDAs because they seemed to offer the best possibility of achieving the vision that was articulated by the community for waterfront development. That's what attracted me in the first place. Over the last several years, I've listened to a lot of Bellinghamsters from all different parts of the community, heard a lot of different thoughtful and heartfelt ideas and concerns about how development's being done in our town. As a result, I am more certain than ever that as the city grows and as governing grows more complex and demanding, it's likely that Bellingham will need a PDA in its future. One of the most interesting and exciting possibilities that a PDA offers is a way to do development that is guided by and directly benefits the public and directly engages the community in co-creating the vibrant, dynamic, connected Bellingham that we want to see and be a part of. Again, thank you for your time and support and for the work you do for our community. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to address the council on this issue? Is there anyone else that wants to address the council? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public part of the hearing, bring it back to the council. Gene?
Yes, I too want to echo what former Mayor Pike said about all the members that took their time, and we want to thank them for that too. But I also want to remind people that before we had the PDA, there was a lot of things that went on downtown that the City of Bellingham proved through the council and the administration that we could do. So I'm going to take you back to the corner of Railroad and Holly, the Four Corners, and I'm going back quite a few years. When DePaul's Jewelry burnt and that was tore down, it was a hole in the ground. City of Bellingham entertained offers to get a retail building in there. It's now a Starbucks. There's a bank there, and there's apartments up on top. Across the street was the Travel Lodge. We went through the same thing we went through with the Aloha Motel. And through the City of Bellingham's work and some legal stuff, now it's Bob's Burger and Brew, and there's apartments and retail there. Across the street was the Flame Tavern, which was falling down. Now it's the Pita Pit and other businesses. And across the street is Little Cheerful. So my point is this. I appreciate everything that the PDA did, but I am confident that the council and the administration in future years will be able to handle what we need to do to bring economic vitality to the City of Bellingham, working along with the port on the waterfront. So I am inclined to go ahead and move the resolution that we have in our packet.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second before us. Any comments? Jack.
I want to speak against the resolution. To me, I feel like this particular decision is very premature. We're trying to reconstitute a community development section of our planning department, and I applaud the mayor for putting that together and getting the staff situated to start working on that and to have a vision, at least for the downtown. We have an implementation strategy. I think it's great. And I think we're starting to do some work on Samish Way, and that's also good too. We have the opportunity to work on Army Street because of the result of the PDA. But I feel like simply removing this entity is not a very thoughtful way of doing community development. I feel like it's like building a house, and you can build a house two different ways. You can build it with a circular saw, or you can build it without the circular saw. And it's going to take a little bit longer, and you're not having all of the tools available to you in order to build that house if you simply go and ditch some of them. And this is I think, a very valuable tool, and we don't know exactly how it could be used in the future, But I think that's what our community development section should be doing. That's one of the things that they should do over these next couple of years, is to determine through the entire workload that they have on their plate, how they're going to implement these various strategies. And I believe that they may see a value in doing that. And yes, we could go and reestablish a PDA in the future if we so needed it. But I attended most of the PDA meetings from the very beginning, and I saw the amount of effort that went into incorporation and the amount of expense that went into incorporation. And we're on a fairly austere budget, and to have extra monies go out to reinvent the wheel that we already have and basically go and destroy this wheel, I feel like it's too early to do that. I think we really should find out for a fact that, Gene, you mentioned some very good projects that were done in the downtown area. Do we have that horsepower, will we have that horsepower in the next couple of years the way that we did in the past? And we ended up having to dissolve that, the community development section before. And it's taking money and it's taking expense just to go and recreate it again. To me, I see absolutely no downside in mothballing it right now. If it Peter, you've mentioned the fact that we'd have to go through and deal with the underlying responsibilities through the enabling ordinance. To me, I think it would be just simply saying, we pass another ordinance saying that this other ordinance is held in abeyance for a date certain in the future, and we designate exactly what those responsibilities will be in the future once we understand what they are. And if it turns out that we don't need it, at that time, that's the time we should go and pull the plug on this organization. But I think it's really premature to go and do so now. I mean, we have Samish Way, we have Old Town, we have Army Street. We have no idea whether or not the port is actually going to sign something with Harcourt or not. And if any of those things need some additional assistance in terms of private-public partnerships, a PDA is a really useful vehicle, as we've seen throughout the state, of how other developments have occurred. And I just don't feel like we should be spending money to reincorporate something that we already have. And it looks like we're going to spend quite a bit of money to dissolve this. In reading the packet and seeing the types of things that we have to go and do in order to dissolve this organization, we're going to be spending money there too. And I just feel like, again, it's premature. And so I don't feel comfortable about voting for it.
Roxanne?
Well, I just want to suggest that if we were to dissolve this tonight, we wouldn't be destructing the entire thing. These documents live, they breathe, they get stored. At any time, we could recall them. At any time, we could review them. The reason that I am inclined to dissolve is because I don't know what the future development authority will be. Maybe it's a project-based development authority. In that case, I wouldn't want to call it a public development authority. I might want to call it the Samish Way Development Authority. I might want to call it the Old Town Development Authority. And the structure that goes along with that might be different. So I'm inclined to do it like that, especially since if we keep it in the books and we have to continue to have a board, how are we going to attract a board that will meet on a regular basis about nothing? We have enough problems with trying to fill our seats for all of our boards and commissions. So those are some of my rationales.
I'm going to, first, Mayor, I'm going to speak. Yeah, okay. But, I really understand what you're saying, Jack. This is an important tool. And it's too bad that the talent that was attracted to this, was amazing. The people that served on this board, it's pretty hard to look at the talent that was on that board and not just kind of shake your head. It's hard to get that kind of volunteer talent to come forward and work. work with it. And it was a little unfortunate that the economy hit the downturn when it did. And so the PDA wasn't able to really show what it can do. But the thing is, for this tool to be effective, when it was put in place, we had the council and mayor on the same page behind and believing in the PDA. For this to work, that's what has to happen. You have to have the administration and the council backing this entity and letting this entity go forth and do the work that we're saying want them to do. That's not the case now. And it's not going to be the case, this next year and probably into the near future. So even though I truly believe this is a great vehicle that we could use and could be really an important tool, unless we have that combination of administration and council backing it, it loses the strength and of what it can do. And without it, and so we can say let's mothball it, but I have to say right now, the way things are, that we're better off not spending additional money right now. At some future time, if a future council decides that this is the way to go, we have the framework, the blueprint that we can revive on how to do it. And yes, it's going to cost us a little more, but we don't have to. I agree with you, Roxy. It's going to be hard to recruit people of the quality that we have had on something to keep them actively engaged when it's not something that's 100%, believed in between the administration and the council. So as much as I would like to see it keep going, as much as I believe in the entity, I think at this point I will support the motion. Michael.
Thanks, Terry. I think this is a very good discussion, but I kind of want to refocus it a little bit. This is not about no PDA versus PDA, or PDA is a good idea. I think everyone supports and sees the utility of PDAs in certain situations. I know that Kelly herself has been a supporter of PDAs at the state level. So let's not talk about this PDA and why this one did or didn't succeed, but let's talk about whether or not we may need a PDA in the future, and whether or not dissolving it will be creating a pain for us in the future. It took a substantial amount of time and effort to draft and create this PDA. I don't think it's a simple matter of turning the switch back on again, taking out the old documents and signing the bottom of them. I think it'll be the same amount of time and effort. People will want to go over it just as much. So I don't think we can easily resurrect this. And so I'm more interested in looking at the mothball idea, or at least maybe what Jack said is most persuasive. This is premature. Maybe a year from now, I will say time to dissolve. But there's a lot of things, a lot of questions that haven't been answered, and there's a lot of pending projects for where a PDA might be necessary. It may be that rewriting this PDA is a quick and easy way to get the new PDA that we might want, or it may be dissolving and rewriting from scratch is the new way. I don't know, but I do know PDAs are useful, and one day Bellingham will probably want to need a PDA, and I don't see any reason to act now to get rid of this one before we're certain that this one isn't the raw material we need in the future to modify this existing PDA, as opposed to start with a new one. I don't feel we've fully explored all the clever possibilities for ways to mothball this. I agree having a dummy entity where people meet and don't do anything is absurd, and it'd be nice to be able to avoid that. I will note ironically that there are actually several ghost committees out there. One I think the county had that some of us city council members served on for years without knowing it, until it was finally pointed out it hadn't met, and there were pending applications that were never processed because the ghost entity never met. So, I mean, weird things do happen. But I think we can avoid that thoughtfully. I just don't think that that thought has gone into it yet. So I'm not ready to dissolve the PDA. Maybe I will be one day. I think it's important to discuss what a PDA would be good for. And I think Scott said it very well. PDAs are good when they have a clear mission. This PDA was to have had a mission with regard to the waterfront, and that mission was never given to it. Instead, it was given a less clear mission with a mishmash of properties, half of which were never actually fully conveyed to the PDA, and it never really had the freedom to dispose of. So if we do have a future PDA, we'll need to observe those lessons and have a clearer mission. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Pinky?
I also wanted to reiterate the amazing job that the PDA board did and all the people. We had a stellar team on that board, and I know they tried to do some great things. I had a vision in the beginning, and not everything worked out the way we all thought it would. So this is nothing against the amazing board or all the work and hours of the people who put those things forward. But I do think that if we do go forward and there are projects where we are requiring a PDA, I think at that time we might want something different. And trying to fit something into an old system for people who created this maybe 6 or 7 years ago may not be applicable in the future. And I think at that point we're probably going to start from scratch anyway. So I think that it's probably best for us to just move forward, and when we get to that stone, then we cross it there. So I'm gonna vote to dissolve.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we have a motion and second before us to pass the resolution. All those in favor, answer aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 4-2 with Kathy Lehman excused. Okay, Mayor?
I just wanted to clarify that the cost of the dissolution has all been accounted for in the money that you have already assigned to the PDA. So that included Jim's $60,000 of severance plus and any outstanding bills, which by then there weren't. I think all the bills had been paid. So I just wanted to reassure the council that there won't be more money coming out of the next budget to do the dissolution because it's already been paid for.
Jack?
My comment had to do with staff time in order to go and do all of the different activities that were laid out in the packet.
Okay.
Well, and that's, that really is their job to do that, and so they will.
Okay. Okay, moving right along. We'll now have a report of the council's standing committee meetings. The first is Public Works, Public Safety, and I was chair. So we had one item before us today, and that was an ordinance adopting a base rate for 2015 transportation impact fees pursuant to Chapter 19.06 of the Bellingham Municipal Code. The transportation impact fee, the TIF, base rate for each PM peak hour vehicle trip is adjusted each year according to the actual cost of construction and the program cost of capital improvements needed to accommodate new growth and development in the annual 6-year transportation improvement program. The 2015 TIF base rate represents a decrease from the 2014 TIF. The amendment to the TIF schedule is necessary to help recover the proportionate fair share cost of transportation infrastructure to accommodate new growth and development in Bellingham. Staff recommends approval of the attached ordinance adopting a base rate of $1,869 for 2015 and revising the TIF rate schedule accordingly as Table 19.06.040A. This afternoon, the council recommended approval, and I so move.
Second.
Okay, any comments? Okay, all those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes 6-0. Also, at that meeting, we did have a discussion about having a further discussion of the TIP and how that's set and rates in the coming year.
Yes, absolutely. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. And really the discussion was around that proportionate fair share of the cost of infrastructure to support growth. And going back to the study that really established the foundation for how we set our TIF. And so the mayor's committed to bringing that discussion back to the council, along with other impact fees and development-related costs, looking at how we can utilize those fees to incent development in certain areas of town while making sure that we are recovering the proportionate fair share and getting policy input from the council as to what that is and how do we work to set up our fees to do that very thing. So sometime after the first of the year, and that's a project that Tara Sundin is leading, but all the departments are working with her on that.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, next up is a report of the Lake Whatcom Reservoir and Natural Resources. Pinky Vargas is chair.
I am, but I was not at the meeting, and Councilmember Murphy has graciously offered to give us our report.
Thank you, Madam Vargas. So the Lake Whatcom Policy Group had a great meeting, and our major topic of discussion was capital project improvements that will dramatically reduce phosphorus going into Lake Whatcom. And so we got a report from city staff and also from county staff about all these different kinds of infrastructure improvements, if it's surface water improvements or rain gardens. And all of that information is available on a website I want to give you. It's www.lakewhatcom.whatcomcounty.org. And there you can find descriptions of the different projects, because I don't want to go into great detail about it, because boy, it's exciting though, so I hope you'll check it out. And we also discussed what we'll be working on within the next year. Topics include the AIS program and recreational management and an annual Lake Whatcom monitoring report. So that just gives you a sense. And then also, I think it's exciting that we'll soon be approving at our level a 5-year plan to improve Lake Whatcom. But that 5-year plan will include major outreach to the community, so you can tell us what you think about that 5-year plan, and we can incorporate your feedback. But that meeting will happen in February. We will be releasing the 5-year plan for input. So that's my report.
Okay. And just one other fact, we are not meeting in January. We will be reconvening in February for that special meeting on our 5-year report. And that's the end of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Next is Parks and Recreation. Roxanne Murphy, chair.
Back at it again. So we had one agenda item for Parks and Recreation. It was a budget ordinance authorizing use of up to $52,000 from the Cemetery Cash Endowed Care Fund. You know, this was a bit of a tough topic for us. For anyone who doesn't know, the city manages the Bayview Cemetery, and nationwide we're seeing that people are choosing cremation over standard burials. And so that's why we needed to ask, the Parks Department needed to ask for this $52,000 for support. It received a mixed recommendation of 1 vote against and 2 votes for, but I move that we pass the budget ordinance of up to $52,000.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second before us. Any comments? Michael.
I was there this morning, but I wasn't on the committee, and I want to ask a question about the endowment fund. I assume, I'm just, how appropriate is that? We've done it before, but I mean, I don't like drawing from the endowment fund. There's maybe no better fund, but was that endowment set up with a particular mission, and what was that mission? And who paid into that fund?
Well, it was set up. It was set up to take care of the grave sites in the future. It has been changed in 1989. There was an ordinance that allowed council to redirect the money to do improvements at the cemetery, to pay for cemetery other costs at the cemetery. So we've done it a number of times over the years. The only other alternative is to increase the general fund subsidy at this point. So you can pick the lesser of two evils there. But ultimately, the city is responsible for the obligations of the cemetery, and those will continue into the future because we continue to have people that have prepaid for burial service and plots in the cemetery. So we will continue to have expenditures in the future. Even if we closed it tomorrow, those obligations will continue. So
yeah, I understood all that. I understood all that. I'm just wondering whether or not the principal was in any way protected in that
by
fund.
council direction, you can direct those funds to pay for this.
Okay, so I guess I'm hearing is,
Yes.
yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, I was the one that voted against it this morning, or this afternoon. I really feel like it's inappropriate to rob an endowment fund. I think it's the worst type of thing that we can do in terms of our fiduciary responsibilities on the council, and I'm strongly opposed to it. I feel like even though it had been done in the past, it certainly wasn't done in my 7 years on the council. It must have been before that.
Just a sec. We did it last December for $75,000. So it's been done.
Was that on consent agenda? I don't recall that.
You know,
You might have
last
been gone.
December.
You were probably, don't you
We
leave
did
the
it.
last meeting in December?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was gone that.
So it's
Okay.
been done several times, and that was
I
the
haven't
most
voted
recent
for
one.
it. I don't know. To me, it just seems like, it's there. It's established for a particular reason. It's what we're doing is going into a death spiral with this fund, and in a lot of ways with the cemetery itself. And I feel like ultimately it's going to come out of the general fund, one way or the other. And to me, I just feel like we're establishing poor precedents by continuing to do this, or by doing this. I find it kind of interesting. I mean, there is a little bit of an analogy to the Greenways Endowment Fund and how it was used for Chuckanut Ridge, and we ended up using it, but it was used with the condition that it was going to be repaid. And I feel like this is the same thing. We're not going to repay this. And there's a lot of people that contributed to it over the decades, and I feel like this is just a shame to go and do this.
I accept that you don't agree, but it's not setting a precedent, because this was, the council did vote, what was it, 89? To set this up, to allow this. So there's, a precedent is doing something new. This has been done. It's for the preservation and maintenance of the cemetery, of which people's, the other is we may come to having to subsidize others' burial sites, which, some will say, well, that's not really fair because you're not subsidizing where my folks are, or whatever, so, there's no good situations with this, but it's not a new precedent. This has been going on. We've been unfortunately having to do that because of the cost of it. So I will support it. Jack?
Yeah, I agree with you, Terry. It's not a precedent.
Right.
I should have used the word practice.
Yeah.
This is a poor practice, a very poor practice.
Yeah. Okay, Michael?
I agree it is a poor practice, and this will not solve the problem with the cemetery. Our Parks Department, everyone is very aware of the problem. I guess I'm going to support it because in reading over the ordinance, it says clearly it may be used for the care and operation of the cemetery or for capital improvements. So it includes operation. This is just operation. If it was care and capital improvements, I think I'd be far happier. Technically, I think we're okay. We need to solve the problem in some other way next time.
This has been an ongoing problem for years, and I'm confident there's got to be a way out there for us to change what we're doing out there, and I think the administration will be looking at that. Cemeteries clear across the country have to look at new ways of doing things. How do you advertise? I mean, we've been through that before. You just, I mean, it's a tough thing to have. But on the other side, there's a lot of families in this community that, you know, the thought of selling it, I've said that many, many times, but boy, that raises the hackles of a lot of people. But I think there's something that can be done, and hopefully we won't have to do this anymore.
Mayor?
Well, I'm a big supporter of endowment funds for capital improvement, so this is not pleasant for me either. So this is not the first thing I rushed in to do. But I think Jack's point is it's going to come out of the general fund one way or the other, and this gives us a year to come up potentially with another solution. The somewhat disappointing thing is because it's happening nationwide, there's not a silver bullet out there in some other community that's going to say, this is what we did. I mean, so we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do maybe ourselves. But just so you know, even as we speak, Director King is actually looking at the things that we talked about, staffing and rotations and a lot of other things that may reduce the cost of operating out at the cemetery for the next year until we can come up with a recommendation. But it's definitely not ideal, and we do need to find another solution, and I think it's going to be very, very difficult.
Jack?
One last word on this.
Okay.
I am really concerned about rating this endowment is not a good practice, as I said before, but I'm also concerned about the fact that if we do it on this, what's going to stop us? We know that we're having some problems in parks and the operation budget for parks. What's going to stop us from rating the Greenways endowment principal? I mean, we use it already for you know, the interest on operations as it was set up for. But there was a very specific community expectation that we would have an endowment. And I think the community really is expecting that we're not going to go and rate it in the future. And I hope that we, you know, for as much as it's so easy to go and vote for it today on the cemetery endowment, I really hope that you think about how this will be treated when we have our conversations about park operation budget issues in the future, and that we don't go and touch that other endowment. Endowments are sacred. You really need to treat them much more carefully than what we're doing
Mayor,
tonight.
One more comment.
I think it's really important as we talk about the parks endowment to make sure that we educate the public that when we first passed that endowment, we didn't have enough in it, and then the interest rate went down, the interest that we're supposed to spend on the operation and maintenance. So as we go into a potential another levy, or as we put more general fund into the operations and maintenance that was supposed to come out of the endowment, that we use it as an educational moment to the public so they understand that there's not enough money in the endowment to do what we promised them we would do with it. So just so we're presenting the information to the public, I agree with you, Jack. That's not what the endowment's for. So I don't think there's any disagreement.
Okay, we have a motion and second before us. All those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstention? Motion passes 5-1-0.
I almost forgot we were in the Parks Committee. End of committee.
You lost control.
No. It's
Easy to do.
And it's not even late yet. Okay, that brings us to the Committee of the Whole. We had one item before us today, and that was the adoption. Adoption of the City of Bellingham's 2015-2016 budget. The revised Code of Washington requires the City of Bellingham to adopt a final 2015-2016 budget prior to December 31st of 2014. The attached ordinance includes the 2015-2016 appropriations proposed in the preliminary budget, plus the adjustments outlined in the attached summary of changes sheet. This afternoon, the committee recommended approval of the budget with one addition, and that was to add the funding for a downtown ambassadors pilot program at the cost of $24,500 per year. So I recommend approval of the budget ordinance with the approved amendment.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion. Yes.
Okay, I need to read those changes into the ordinance
Okay.
from the amendment that was made this afternoon.
Okay.
At the beginning of the table, the first line, general, in the last two columns, the new amounts are $142,837,515, and in the last column, it's now $13,032,275. And then at the very end of the table, at the total, in the last two columns, it's now 495,808,661 and 109,686,108.
808.
Pardon me?
808.
808, yes, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. I'm glad you're on top of this. I don't know where we'd be without you. Okay, we have a motion and second before us. Any comments? All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Thank you, everyone. Looks like we're going to have a budget.
See you in
Thanks
2016.
your staff for all the hard work of getting us to this point. This is always such a tough process, and it's nice to have that first and second out of the way. Okay, we have one set of minutes for approval, and that would be for November 24th, 2014.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have motion and second. Did you get the
I got
motion
Jack
maker?
and Roxanne.
Okay, thank you. Any comments? All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes 6-0. Let me see. Oh, we had, yes, before I forget, we had an executive session this afternoon. We had one item on it, and that was potential litigation, claim number 2014-44. Staff provided an update on a potential litigation matter. At this time, I would entertain a motion to authorize the mayor to enter into a settlement agreement with the following terms. Resolution of claim 2014-44 for the payment of $26,907.71 to the claimant for damages related to a water main break.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and second before us. Any comments? All those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes 6-0. On to the mayor's report. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you very much. I just, mostly these are appointments. One you have to vote on, the rest are just for information. And I also have Rick here to do a little update on, go ahead.
Should do that now.
Do that now.
Good evening, members of the council. I wanted to stop by on behalf of the interdepartmental team that's working on preparing your packets for next week, just to introduce a few items so that when you receive them, you'll understand the context of them. We are preparing a revised draft ordinance for rental registration and inspection consistent with your direction from your last meeting. There are a number of minor clarifications and revisions that staff will be proposing. None of those change the policy direction, but provide clarity so that we can better implement it. I think you'll review them and see them to be fairly minor in nature. We note that staff is working diligently to find the best way of implementing the program after potential action by council. And in doing so, there is a draft ordinance start date for implementation of July 1st. That's predicated on the city being able to piggyback on the B&O system that we would use for the state system that would provide a way for the simplest and fastest, least costly way to do it. And the inquiry of whether that will work is ongoing, and we should have hopefully answers or at least some more information for you by next week's time on that. A specific proposed change that is highlighted for you to consider is dealing with the potential for an incentive. Staff would recommend that you include the policy direction to develop it, but consider it more fully when we bring back the fee schedule. Specific to that, we want to understand the cost implications of it and be able to see the values associated with it. Again, doesn't change the intent, but we'd come back to you with a proposal once we sort out the exact price itself. In terms of other matters on the ordinance itself and the implementation, we're working to identify the most cost-effective means of actually implementing both the registration and the inspection itself. We've made contact with other jurisdictions that are using our future permitting system, and they also have rental registration, so we've talked with them, though it's not yet conclusive on some of the changes we need to incorporate. We should know more. As I understand it, IT and others have a teleconference scheduled with them for tomorrow to find out those nuances. We're working to identify the estimated cost for registration implementation. We're trying to reduce the variables as much as possible so we can bring you a good range, but it would be a range at this point, because there will be some costs that will not be able to be identified until we actually get into the process of doing the work itself. We would probably suggest that it would be appropriate that we'll set what we believe based on best information for you to consider the fees, and that at the end of a year likely regroup, look at the actual costs that were incurred and adjust the fees accordingly. So that's an update on what you'll be receiving, and I hope it sets the context for the materials you receive.
Thank you very much, Rick. Mayor.
Well, I can't get too much information, correct?
That's right.
All right. One of the things, I think Roxanne, Terry, and Pinky were at the Christmas, the holiday tree lighting.
You could say Christmas.
No, I can't.
Yes, you can.
Sorry.
It was a holiday.
All right. Anyway, it was very well attended, and the best thing was they had a pop-up market at the Depot Market Square, and people loved it.
Yes.
And so I really want to thank the staff that put this together. Darby was there doing her thing, and Public Works staff had set things up, and the Downtown Partnership. Pinky was there putting on her used LED lights, which was well received.
Yes.
Yeah. And we had people donate, Woods Coffee and others donate. But it was really a nice community event, and I'm looking forward to continuing to be able to do that. So it was great.
It was a wonderful turnout.
It was a wonderful turnout. And, you know, I like to be able to say something positive and friendly at this mayor's report, and that's what it is.
That was our third year, I think.
Huh?
I think that was the third year we've done it. It was done back in the 40s and 30s, but this is the third year we've done it. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so the first thing that needs approval is my appointment of Richard Davis III and to the Civil Service Commission, and the reappointment of David Warren.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion.
And I think about David Warren for a couple of weeks before we pass this. I know he's watching, so I'm just kidding, David.
Yeah, we'll
You
let
would
him
do
know
that
in
to your
case he
favorite
wasn't.
brother?
My favorite brother, yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes 6-0.
And the rest of these are just for information only, so I'll read through them. Appointment of Stephen Rasich to the Bellingham Sister Cities Advisory Board. Appointment of Nicole Burdick and Jessica Brown to the Community Development Advisory Board. This will be a good one. Appointment of Zaccarelli, Frescobaldi, Grimaldi to the Parks and Recreation Board. He said his name was Zach. I can call him Zach. I think he's going to be a great addition. Just a little bit more information about Zach. He works with people of differing abilities, and I think that his inclusion on the Parks and Rec Board will be a very good thing to get an additional perspective to how our parks work for everybody. And then finally, reappointment of Ron Jepson and Bob Ross to the Public Works Advisory Board. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, consent agenda.
Move approval. Is that with the first item? That's with the first item, right? Because we pulled that out.
That's what I was going to.
Yeah, so I'll move
We'll
this.
leave it in, Michael?
Yes.
Move
Okay.
the full consent agenda.
Okay.
We can separate, if you want to vote on it separate, that doesn't matter to me.
I don't care.
Huh?
I don't care.
We can do
Okay.
that. That doesn't bother me any.
You left it in. so-
Okay. Roxanne.
Let Jean have it this week. Okay, we have a motion and second before us. All those in favor answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes 6-0. Final consideration of ordinances.
The first one is Agenda Bill 20642, an ordinance relating to the vacation of an unnamed east-west right-of-way generally located west of the west line of 15th Street, centered between Taylor and Douglas Avenues, all within the city of Bellingham.
Move third and final.
Second?
Terry Borneman,
Aye.
Jean Knutson.
Aye.
Michael Lillquist.
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy.
Aye.
Pinky Vargas.
Aye.
Jack Weiss.
Aye.
Ordinance passes 6-0. Kathy Lehman excused.
Excuse me just a minute. Jack, you had a...
I guess a question for Ted. We had two different vacations, but we're only doing third and final on this one?
I can answer that.
Oh, okay.
The other one is being held for action by another party.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Linda, you're on.
Yes, I know. Seth, where would we be without her?
We'd be home watching Monday Night Football.
Okay.
Because I asked
It's all
the same
yours
question. Agenda Bill 20656, an ordinance amending the 2014 adopted budget, transferring $14,820 from the general fund to the governmental debt service fund and appropriating an additional $14,820 in the governmental debt service fund. These lawyers that write this stuff, I tell you.
Third and final?
Second.
Jean Knutson. Michael Lillquist.
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy.
Aye.
Pinky Vargas.
Aye.
Jack Weiss.
Aye.
Terry Borneman.
Aye.
Ordinance passes 6-0.
Okay. We are now adjourned. Woo-hoo.